They are the shadows on the highways, the roar in the distance. They are the Bandidos Motorcycle Club. To the outside world, their name evokes whispers of trouble, of defiance, of the lawless fringe. They are the outlaws, the men of leather and chrome, who live by their own code, separate from the rest of society. But sometimes the darkest shadows hide the brightest light. Sometimes the men everyone fears are the only ones brave enough to ride to the rescue. This is the story of one night, one desperate text message, and the 70 bandidos who proved that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear cuts. The main hall of the Bandidos clubhouse was loud tonight. It was a typical Friday, heavy with the scent of stale beer, motor oil, and the faint, ever-present smell of leather. Big Dog, the chapter president, was holding court at the center table. A mountain of a man with a beard that could stop a bullet, he was the axis around which the entire chapter spun. Surrounding him were men named Reaper, Ghost, Switch, and Axel, all veterans, hard men whose eyes had seen too much and whose loyalty was forged in fire. They were discussing club business, talking logistics for an upcoming charity run, a detail the local news would never report, when the silence in Big Dog's pocket shattered. It was a cheap, high-pitched ringtone he'd never bothered to change. He ignored it at first. Then, the phone vibrated again, an insistent buzzing against the wooden table. With a grunt, Big Dog pulled out his burner phone, the one almost no one had the number to. He looked at the screen, and the noise in the room instantly seemed to dim, focusing every pair of hardened eyes on his face. The text was simple. 5 words, sent from an anonymous number the club had set up specifically for a handful of community contacts, people who were in deep trouble, the kind of trouble the police couldn't or wouldn't touch. The message read, "He's breaking in again." Big Dog didn't need any more context. He knew exactly who it was from and what he meant. It was from Maria, a single mother living in a rough part of town who had been dealing with an increasingly violent and possessive ex-partner, a man who believed the law didn't apply to him. The courts had failed her. The restraining order was just a piece of paper, and the local police had classified the incidents as domestic disputes, often showing up too late or not at all. Maria's last resort, her secret lifeline, was the number for the Bandidos MC. She had been introduced to the club through a local shelter they quietly supported, and though she was terrified of them at first, she learned that their protection was absolute. Big Dog didn't say a word. He just stood up, the chair scraping loudly across the concrete floor. The sudden movement silenced the entire room of hardened men. He held the phone up, displaying the 5 words to his vice president, Reaper, who read the message, his face hardening into a mask of cold resolve. "Maria's house," Reaper said, his voice low but carrying across the hall. "He's back." The atmosphere in the clubhouse changed instantly. The casual camaraderie vanished, replaced by an electric tension, the kind of readiness that comes from years of high-stakes, instant action. This wasn't about turf wars or rivalry. This was about a woman and her children being terrorized. This was about their code, protect the weak, even if it meant becoming the monster the villain already was. "Axel," Big Dog commanded, his voice a low growl of thunder, "rally the chapters. Tell them it's immediate. Code red. Maria needs us now." Axel didn't hesitate. He grabbed his radio, broadcasting a simple, coded message across the city to every Bandidos member who was within riding distance. The message was cryptic to outsiders, but every patch holder knew what it meant. "The line is crossed. Gear up. Destination, the nest." The nest was Maria's house. "The line is crossed" meant a non-Bandido had directly violated their promise of protection. Within minutes, the clubhouse parking lot transformed from a quiet lot into a raging machine. Members who had been halfway home turned their bikes around. Those who'd been relaxing in their own houses jumped into their gear. The call had gone out to all the regional patches, from the main chapter to the support crews. The total number they could mobilize within an hour was close to 100, but the initial, ready-to-roll contingent was already forming. 60, maybe 70 bikes, all roaring to life simultaneously. The ground began to shake. Big Dog climbed onto his massive custom Harley, the engine thrumming beneath him like a caged beast. He looked at the faces around him, faces that were usually hard and stoic, now burning with a focused, righteous anger. They knew the score. They weren't riding to mediate a domestic dispute. They were riding to end a reign of terror. They were riding to be the force that the legal system had failed to be. They were riding to save a mother and her children. Reaper pulled up alongside him, his bike spitting fire. "Lead the way, Prez," he said, his voice sharp and clear above the engine noise. Big Dog nodded once, a gesture of absolute resolve. "We ride hard, we ride fast. No traffic laws matter tonight. Maria is waiting." And with that, the first bike pulled out, followed by a torrent of roaring thunder. 70 engines screamed their collective agreement, their chrome flashing under the streetlights, turning the night air into a symphony of righteous fury. The Bandidos MC had mobilized, and they were heading straight into the heart of a crisis. Not as criminals, but as the only defenders left. The world thought they were bad men. Tonight, they were about to be heroes. The text message had been sent, the alarm raised, and the cavalry was on the road. The ride itself was a spectacle of controlled chaos. 70 heavy motorcycles all thundering down the city streets, forming a tight, disciplined convoy that moved with the speed and precision of a military unit. Their destination was the dilapidated, working-class neighborhood where Maria lived, an area generally ignored by authorities until a crime was already committed. But tonight this neighborhood was about to receive a visitation it would never forget. The sound alone was deafening, a rolling wall of mechanical thunder that vibrated windows miles away. This wasn't just noise, it was an announcement, a psychological weapon that preceded their arrival, meant to intimidate anyone who stood in their way, and most importantly, the target of their rage. Big Dog, leading the pack, kept his eyes fixed on the path, his massive silhouette cutting through the urban sprawl. He ran every red light, ignored every speed limit. The stakes were too high for caution. Every minute wasted was a minute Maria and her children spent in terror. Meanwhile, back at Maria's small cinder block house, the tension was suffocating. The he in the text, her ex-partner Victor, was already inside. He hadn't broken a window or smashed the door. He had simply used a spare key he had kept, asserting his toxic, possessive control. Maria and her 2 children, a 6-year-old girl named Elena and a 10-year-old boy named Leo, were huddled in the laundry room, the only space they could reasonably barricade themselves into right off the kitchen. Maria's heart was pounding so hard she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. She knew Victor was drunk and furious. She could hear his heavy, uneven footsteps stomping through the living room. "Maria, come out. We need to talk," he slurred, his voice echoing menacingly. "You can't hide from me. I'm your husband." He wasn't. The divorce had been final for 6 months, but he clung to the lie. Elena was whimpering softly, her small hands clutching her mother's jeans. Leo, usually a brave boy, was wide-eyed with fear, gripping a plastic toy wrench, his tiny, useless defense. Maria had sent the text the moment she heard the rattling of the key in the lock, knowing that help was likely too far away. She hoped the Bandidos would understand the urgency. She had no idea the sheer force they were mobilizing. Victor, meanwhile, had stopped stomping and was now trying to pry the locked laundry room door open with a kitchen knife, cursing under his breath. The thin wood was beginning to splinter near the handle. "You think this little lock will stop me?" he yelled, his voice laced with venom. He was close. Too close. Maria closed her eyes, praying for a miracle, regretting having to pull the Bandidos into her mess, but knowing they were her only shot. It was at this exact moment, just as the wood near the lock gave a loud, definitive crack, that the world outside erupted. The sound wave hit the house like a physical punch. It was a roar of such colossal magnitude that Victor instantly froze, the knife halfway to the door. It wasn't the sound of a police siren or a single car backfiring. It was the synchronized, apocalyptic thunder of 70 V-twin engines arriving at once. The entire street seemed to vibrate. Dust and pebbles danced on the pavement. The bikes formed a massive, intimidating crescent around Maria's modest house, blocking off both ends of the street. The men dismounted, their movements fluid and practiced. 70 giants in leather and denim, Their cuts emblazoned with the powerful Bandidos insignia were now silently surrounding the house. The sight alone was overwhelming. Neighbors cautiously opened their windows, instantly recognizing the insignia and quickly retreating, knowing to never interfere with a Bandidos matter. This was not a social visit. Big Dog, Reaper, and Ghost advanced toward the front door. Big Dog, ignoring the doorbell, raised his massive, boot-clad foot and delivered a single, devastating kick. The old wooden door didn't just open. It exploded inward, ripping the frame from the wall and scattering splintered wood across the living room floor. The house went dark as the three men stepped inside, their silhouettes filling the gaping hole where the door used to be. The air was heavy with the smell of motor oil and cold fury. Victor, completely paralyzed by the noise and the sudden violent entry, dropped the knife, which clattered loudly on the tiled floor. He was standing near the kitchen, staring down the hallway, his face a mask of shock, confusion, and quickly dawning fear. He hadn't expected the police, much less this. He had expected Maria to be alone. He stared, speechless, as Big Dog's colossal form filled his vision. Big Dog didn't waste time with threats or speeches. His eyes locked onto Victor with a chilling intensity. "You received a warning," Big Dog stated, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that was far more terrifying than any scream. "You crossed the line. The family is protected." Victor, finding his voice, tried to bluster. "Who the hell are you? Get out of my house, I'll call the cops." Reaper stepped forward, a cold, predatory smile touching his lips. "Call them," he advised softly. "Tell them the Bandidos are here. See who they send." The sheer weight of their presence crushed Victor's bravado instantly. He knew instinctively that these were not men to be reasoned with. This was a consequence that the legal system had never threatened him with. This was justice delivered by outlaws. Victor's bravado had evaporated, replaced by the raw animal panic of a man realizing he was hopelessly outmatched. He knew the police might slap him with a misdemeanor. The Bandidos were something else entirely. They were judgment, delivered outside the sterile confines of a courtroom. He took a stumbling step backward, his eyes darting frantically between Big Dog, Reaper, and Ghost, three immovable forces blocking his escape. "Look, I was just leaving," Victor stammered, raising his hands in a futile gesture of surrender. "I didn't hurt anyone. No harm done, right? Let me just go." Big Dog took a single, deliberate step forward. The sound of his heavy boot hitting the floor was like the final nail being hammered into a coffin. The pressure in the hallway was unbearable. "You said you didn't hurt anyone." Big Dog's voice rumbled, dangerously quiet. "But the terror you put in that woman's heart, the fear you taught those children, that is harm. And it is paid for." At that moment, Maria, hearing the exchange and recognizing the authority in Big Dog's voice, slowly unlocked the laundry room door and cautiously stepped out, Elena clutching her leg, Leo peeking bravely from behind her. Her eyes immediately found Big Dog. The giant biker offered her a barely perceptible nod, a gesture of respect and reassurance. He didn't speak to her, keeping his focus entirely on Victor, communicating silently. "We are here. It's done." Maria, seeing the absolute protection radiating from the three men, finally allowed herself a small, shaky breath of relief, the first one in months. Victor saw Maria and, driven by a final, desperate surge of resentment, took another step toward her, intending to lash out verbally or physically, but he never made it. Before he could even lift his hand, Reaper moved with impossible speed. With a swift, practiced motion, he grabbed Victor's arm, twisting it behind his back with a sickening crunch. Victor let out a strangled cry of pain, his body collapsing against Reaper's iron grip. Ghost quickly secured his legs, lifting the thrashing man off the ground with shocking ease. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 20 seconds. It was decisive, brutal, and effective. Big Dog turned to Maria, his expression softening slightly. "Get your kids and wait in the living room. It's safe now." Maria, tears welling up, simply whispered, "Thank you," before ushering her children out of the kitchen and away from the confrontation. Big Dog then looked at Victor, now whimpering and entirely subdued. "You are done here. You are done with this family. This entire chapter knows your face, your car, and your history. If you ever come within 5 miles of this house, this woman, or these children again, the police will be the least of your concerns. We are your restraining order, and ours doesn't expire." He was giving Victor a lifetime contract of fear, enforced not by law, but by loyalty and force. Victor was then carried, not walked, out of the house. The sight that awaited him outside was designed for maximum impact. 70 massive bikes idling, 70 hardened men standing silent and watchful, all focused entirely on him. The air was thick with the silent, judgmental power of the entire chapter. Victor was physically thrown onto the curb, his keys and the spare house key tossed onto his chest. Big Dog stepped onto the porch, looking at the assembled brothers. He didn't need to say anything. The mission was accomplished. As silently as they had arrived, the Bandidos began to remount their machines. The street remained blocked, the engines roaring back to life, the collective thunder once again drowning out the night. The convoy formed up, ready to depart. But before Big Dog pulled out, he walked back up to the shattered front door. He pulled a thick, heavy wad of cash, far more than the door would cost, from his vest pocket, and placed it gently on Maria's trembling hand. "Get that door fixed tonight. Get a proper security system. And if you ever feel unsafe again, you know the number." Maria could only nod, clutching the money and her children. As Big Dog turned to leave, Leo, the 10-year-old, broke free from his mother, ran to the porch and shouted, "Thank you, sir, you're heroes!" Big Dog stopped, turned, and for the first time that night, a genuine, if brief, smile touched his stern lips. He simply tipped his head, a final acknowledgement of the truth in the boy's words. Then, with a final, earth-shaking blast of noise, the entire Bandidos contingent pulled away. The streetlights flashed off their chrome as they sped away, disappearing back into the shadows of the city from which they came. In their wake, they left behind a shattered door, a terrified and humbled villain, and a family that was finally, truly safe. The neighbors watched in stunned silence, their perception of the outlaws forever altered. Maria stood on the porch watching the last tail light vanish, the roar fading into a distant protective hum. She didn't see criminals. She saw 70 angels of leather and steel. The world would continue to call the Bandidos MC lawless, but to Maria and her children, they were the only law that mattered. They were the heroes who answered a desperate text and rode 70 bikes into the dark night to save a family. The protection was absolute, the debt was paid, the ride was over.